My wife, who's disabled, needs a ramp to get into our home. I was all set to install one when HOA denied the request, informing me that only one approved company could do the job, and of course their prices were 3 times higher than anywhere else. It wasn't always like this. When we first moved into this house, everything felt like it was falling into place. Emily and I had spent years looking for a place that felt like home. Not just a house, but somewhere we could see ourselves grow old together. We wanted the kind of place where the kids could play outside, and we could sit on the porch without worrying about what's next. We didn't just want the American dream, we wanted something that actually felt like ours. Emily, of course, had always been the more optimistic one. She has this thing about finding the beauty in things. It's part of who she is. I don't know, maybe that's why I was drawn to her from the start. She always saw the good, even when things weren't exactly perfect. And I suppose that's why it was so hard to watch her health slip away. It started small, a bad knee here, some joint pain there, but over the years it got worse. And then one day, just like that, she was in a wheelchair. It wasn't something we could plan for or prepare ourselves for. It just was. And I knew right away that our lives were about to change in ways I hadn't even considered. But Emily? She was the same person. She fought to stay positive, pushing through the hardest days with that smile. And that's what kept me going, seeing her strength. But even with all that, I knew we had to adapt. We couldn't just keep going like we had before. So I started thinking about how to make the house work for her, how to make sure she could still get around without a struggle. We looked into ramps. Simple enough, right? We were going to make it work. I found a few options and started talking to contractors. My whole focus was making sure Emily could get into the house without me having to lift her every time. It wasn't much, but it was the least I could do. I'd get the ramp set up and then everything would feel like it used to. But of course, the moment I thought we were on the right track, things went sideways. That's when HOA came into the picture. I figured it was just a matter of filling out some paperwork and getting approval. I mean, I didn't expect fireworks. It was just a ramp. Surely they'd see it for what it was. But no, it wasn't that simple. I thought the hardest part was over, just getting the paperwork filed. But then I got the letter from HOA. I didn't even want to open it at first. I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach, like when you know something's about to go wrong, but you're just hoping it won't. So I opened it. And there it was, the rejection. The one thing I didn't expect. They told me the ramp couldn't be approved. The letter was full of all this vague, legal-sounding stuff. Doesn't meet aesthetic standards for the neighborhood. Doesn't comply with architectural guidelines. I was reading it, and honestly, I had to go over it twice just to make sure I didn't miss something. Was this really happening? They didn't even try to make it sound reasonable. No offer to help or suggest alternatives. Just flat out, no. I mean, this was just a ramp for Emily to get in and out of the house. Nothing fancy. It wasn't like I was asking for a driveway that could park a fleet of cars. But then came the kicker. They weren't just saying no to my plan. They told me there was only one company in the area that was approved to install ramps. A trusted partner, they said. And guess what? The prices for this company were 3 times higher than any of the quotes I had already gotten. I stared at that letter, hands shaking. I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe I was reading it wrong, but no, it was all right there. And then I remembered something. Karen, the HOA president. I had heard rumors about her being connected to some of the contractors in the neighborhood. It was like a light bulb went off in my head. Her son-in-law ran a company, and suddenly it wasn't so hard to connect the dots. The ramp situation wasn't about compliance or safety. It was about money. I felt this anger bubbling up inside me. They weren't doing this for any aesthetic reasons. It was all about pushing their overpriced options, all while trying to make me feel like I had no choice. I didn't even know what to think at that point. Part of me was furious, the other part just wanted to give up and let it go. But Emily needed that ramp. I wasn't about to let them push us around. Not now, not ever. So I did what anyone in my position would do. I started making calls, I started asking questions, and that's when I found out the worst part. Karen wasn't just pushing her son-in-law's business for the ramp. It was happening all over the neighborhood. She had her hand in every corner of HOA's business, and I was just the next target in line. At that point, I knew it wasn't just about the ramp anymore. It was about standing up to this crooked system they had set up. And that was just the beginning. Once I realized what was going on, I knew I had to do something about it. I wasn't going to just let Karen and HOA push me around, not when it came to Emily's health. But that's where things started to get messy. I thought maybe if I explained the situation to a few more people, things would work out. I figured someone would see reason. So I went to a few neighbors, people who had lived here for years. I figured they'd have my back. They knew me, they knew Emily. I figured they'd get it. But no one wanted to step into it. It was like they were all scared. Scared of Karen, scared of HOA, scared of rocking the boat. One of them, a guy named Mike, even told me that HOA had a lot of pull around here. That was his nice way of telling me to drop it. Another neighbor, a woman who had lived here longer than I had, just shrugged and told me, "It's always been this way, just deal with it." I couldn't believe it. These were people who lived in the same neighborhood, who'd seen the same stuff happen, and none of them were willing to help. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a ramp anymore. This was about a whole damn system that didn't care about fairness or doing what's right. It was about power, and power was Karen's game. So I dug in. I wasn't going to give up. I started calling around. Lawyers, contractors, anyone who might be able to shed some light on what was going on. I even started talking to the local media, hoping someone would care about the injustice of it all. The more I dug, the deeper the hole got. I started hearing things that made my skin crawl. Karen had a tight grip on everything. HOA meetings? She ran them. Every contractor who worked in this neighborhood, she knew them and they were her people. Even the local police were in her pocket, or so it seemed. The first sign that things were escalating happened when I called the city's building department. I figured if I couldn't get anywhere with HOA, maybe the city could help. But when I mentioned the ramp and the situation with HOA, the guy on the phone got real quiet. He asked me who my HOA contact was. I told him Karen. There was a long pause, and then he just said, "You're going to want to be careful with this." That was it. No advice, no help, just a warning. I asked him what he meant by that, but he didn't answer. I could feel the weight of it. I wasn't just fighting a couple of people anymore. I was fighting a system. Next, things got personal. I'm not talking about the usual HOA stuff like a note on the door or a slap on the wrist. No, they started sending me official notices. The first one came about my fence, something completely unrelated. I had put up a small privacy screen in the backyard. Totally legal. But Karen must have told someone to look into it, because all of a sudden, I was getting a letter saying the fence was out of code, and that I had to tear it down. I knew it was retaliation. And it wasn't just that. They were digging into everything. I had neighbors telling me they were getting questions about me. Not direct threats, just questions. It felt like they were trying to isolate me, make me seem like the troublemaker. At that point, the fight wasn't just about a ramp anymore. It was about everything they could throw at me to make me back down. And the more I pushed back, the harder they came at me. They didn't just want me to comply, they wanted me broken. But here's the thing. The more they came at me, the more determined I got. Every letter, every ridiculous fine, every phone call made me want to fight harder. I wasn't going to let Karen or HOA control this neighborhood, not on my watch. I was doing this for Emily, and if they thought they could bully me into submission, they were in for a rude awakening. But it wasn't just about fighting them anymore. It was about surviving it, and I had no idea just how far they were willing to go. I knew I couldn't just keep pushing back without trying to make this right. As much as I hated the way Karen and HOA were handling things, I wasn't the type to jump straight into a fight without trying to resolve it first. Emily deserved peace, and the last thing I wanted was for this to escalate even further. So I figured I'd try the whole "let's sit down and talk this out" route. I know, it sounds naive now, but I was holding on to this slim hope that someone might see reason. I tried going the polite route first. I reached out to Karen directly, thinking that if I just explained the situation to her in person, she might understand. Maybe she didn't realize how serious this was for Emily. Maybe she didn't understand that a simple ramp could make all the difference in the world. I don't know what I was thinking exactly, but I figured it was worth a shot. I called her up, and to my surprise, she actually agreed to meet. We set up a time, and I showed up early, hoping this would go smoothly. I wasn't looking for a fight, just a simple conversation. Karen met me in her office, all smiles, like she was doing me a favor. We started with small talk, nothing important, just the usual pleasantries. But as soon as I brought up the ramp, her tone shifted. She started talking about the aesthetic standards again, how it wouldn't fit in with the neighborhood. She even mentioned how important it is to maintain the integrity of the area. I tried not to let that frustrate me, but I could feel my patience thinning. I told her I understood her concerns, but that this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about Emily's health and safety. I told her I wasn't trying to make the neighborhood look ugly. I just wanted to give my wife a way to get in and out of the house. I didn't think that was too much to ask. That's when Karen dropped the bomb. She told me that the HOA had already approved a contractor for the job. Of course, it was the same company she had mentioned before, the one with the inflated prices. I could feel my blood pressure rise, but I kept it together. I asked her why I wasn't informed about this sooner, why I wasn't given a chance to choose a more affordable option. She didn't really answer. Instead, she danced around it, talking about how it's just easier for everyone if we went with the approved company. I pushed back a little, explaining that I'd already gotten multiple quotes, all of which were much cheaper, but she cut me off, saying that the HOA had the final say. I tried one more time to reason with her. I explained that the company she was recommending was 3 times more expensive than what I had found, and there was no way I could justify spending that kind of money on something so simple. I was trying to keep it respectful, keep it civil, but every word out of her mouth made it harder and harder to stay calm. She was talking in circles, twisting every point I made. By the end of the meeting, I realized she wasn't listening. She didn't care about the cost. She didn't care about Emily. She just cared about controlling the situation. I left her office feeling like I had just wasted my time. She wasn't even pretending to consider my side anymore. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. She wasn't going to budge. She was using her position to push her own agenda, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I called a few more people after that, hoping maybe a lawyer could help, or maybe some kind of community mediation would work. But I couldn't get anywhere. The lawyer I spoke with told me HOA had a lot of power, and unless I had a solid case for something like discrimination or unfair practices, I was pretty much stuck. Mediation was just another waste of time. HOA had the upper hand, and Karen knew it. The more I looked into it, the more I realized this wasn't going to be some easy, peaceful resolution. At this point, I realized there wasn't going to be a way to resolve this without a fight. I'd tried the calm, reasonable approach. I'd tried talking to Karen, explaining things, even playing by the rules. But nothing was going to work unless I was willing to go all in. So that's what I did. The gloves were off and I was going to fight, not just for the ramp, but for everything that was at stake. I wish I could say that one day it all just clicked, that I had some grand epiphany and figured out the perfect way to take Karen down. But no, it wasn't like that at all. It was a stupid, random thing that ended up changing everything. I was going through some old paperwork one night, stuff from HOA meetings, random letters, receipts, the kind of stuff I usually just tossed aside. I wasn't even looking for anything important. I was just trying to organize the mess of documents that had started piling up around the house since this whole nightmare began, and that's when I found it. It was a single page, nothing fancy, just a note about the last HOA meeting. At first, I thought it was just some old minutes from a meeting that didn't matter, but then I noticed something weird at the bottom. There was a reference to a contractor I didn't recognize, someone named Wells & Sons Construction. It wasn't on any of the lists I'd seen before, and this wasn't just some random mention. It was highlighted, almost like it had been pushed through quickly without much notice. I grabbed my phone and Googled the name right away. At first, nothing stood out. The company seemed small, mostly residential work. But then I found a site that listed some local business connections, and that's when the dots started connecting. Wells & Sons Construction wasn't just some random contractor, it was a company owned by, wait for it, Karen's son-in-law. I almost dropped my phone when I saw it. I had heard rumors about Karen's connections, but this was bigger than I ever imagined. She had been pushing her son-in-law's company all along, using her position as HOA president to get business for him. And the more I thought about it, the more everything started to make sense. No wonder she was so hell-bent on getting me to use that overpriced company. It wasn't about the ramp or the neighborhood. It was about the money, and she was willing to screw over anyone to make sure her family's pockets were full. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I kept digging through the files, I found a couple more things, small, seemingly insignificant notes, but they were connected to the contractor in ways I hadn't expected. The more I read, the more I realized Karen hadn't just been bending the rules. She'd been straight up breaking them. There were mentions of payments, side deals, things that had been glossed over in previous HOA meetings. And then I found the cherry on top. There was a meeting log that had somehow slipped through the cracks, one that included some of the names from the company's financial records. That's when I realized just how deep this went, how much money Karen had been getting under the table to push her son-in-law's business. It was all there, black and white. She had been using HOA funds for personal gain. I couldn't believe it. I sat there in stunned silence for a good 5 minutes, just trying to process it all. I had been right the whole time. It wasn't just about a ramp. This was about a crooked, power-hungry woman who had been using her position to line her own pockets. I was furious, of course, but more than anything, I was filled with this weird sense of relief. For weeks, I had felt like I was screaming into a void, like no one would ever believe me. But now? Now I had something real, something that would make everyone listen. This wasn't just a story about a ramp anymore, it was about corruption, and I was going to bring it all to light. That night, I started putting things together. I wasn't just going to take Karen down for Emily's sake. I was going to take her down for everyone who had ever been bullied by her. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about exposing everything she had been hiding, and I was going to make sure that once it all came out, she would never get away with it again. The moment I found those documents, everything changed. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. Before, I'd been focused on one thing, getting a ramp for Emily. But now it was personal. Now it was about taking Karen down, exposing everything she'd been hiding, and making sure she couldn't hurt anyone else the way she'd hurt us. I sat down that night with my phone, my laptop, and the stack of papers I had found earlier. I knew I had something big, but I also knew I needed a solid plan. I couldn't just rush into this without making sure I had everything lined up. Karen had more power than I could have ever imagined, and if I was going to take her down, I had to be smart about it. First things first, I needed help. I couldn't take on someone like Karen alone. I called up Mike, that neighbor of mine who'd been reluctant to get involved. He was a lawyer, and while he wasn't in a position to openly challenge HOA, I knew he could offer some guidance. I'd been careful not to mention anything too incriminating over the phone, but I needed him to help me get organized. He agreed to meet me the next day. When we met, I laid everything out for him. I showed him the documents, pointed out the connections I had uncovered. Mike was quiet as he skimmed through everything. I could tell he was thinking, processing, maybe even a little shocked. Finally, he looked up at me and said, "This is big. Real big." He wasn't wrong. It was bigger than I thought, and I had the evidence to prove it. Mike suggested we get a private investigator involved, someone who could dig deeper into the financial side of things. We needed to connect the dots between the shady payments, Karen's influence in HOA, and any legal violations she'd made. I agreed, but we also needed to gather witness statements. I wasn't going to just have paper evidence, I needed people who could testify to Karen's manipulative ways. I wasn't sure who would be willing to speak up, but I knew I had to try. So I went to a few more neighbors, the ones who hadn't completely turned their backs on me. Some of them were scared of retaliation, scared of Karen's power. But a couple of them? They listened, and they were ready to stand with me. That felt like a win. With Mike's help, we started compiling a list of everything Karen had done wrong. All the things that could expose her, contract irregularities, the inflated prices, the kickbacks. We needed to be meticulous, make sure we had everything backed up, every claim supported by evidence. I spent days on end gathering documents, meeting with witnesses, and crossing every T and dotting every I. It was exhausting, but I wasn't about to let up. I also needed a way to expose Karen publicly. I couldn't let her just slide under the radar again. If I wanted to destroy her influence, I needed to make sure everyone knew what she'd done. I started reaching out to local reporters, the ones who might be interested in covering a story like this. I made some calls, sent some emails. I wasn't sure what would come of it, but I had to try. And then, just when I thought I had everything lined up, I realized something. I needed to go after the HOA board itself. Karen was the ringleader, but she wasn't working alone. I needed to find out who else was complicit, who else had been turning a blind eye to her corruption. The board members would be crucial to this whole thing. If I could expose them too, I'd be able to break the entire system. It was starting to feel like a real fight now, one I wasn't going to lose. I'd gathered the pieces, now it was time to put them together. This wasn't just about the ramp anymore, it was about something much bigger. And if I could pull this off, I'd make sure Karen's little empire crumbled. It was going to take time, strategy, and a whole lot of patience, but I was ready for it. I took a deep breath, looked at the documents one last time, and smiled. The plan was set. Now it was just a matter of watching everything fall into place. I wasn't expecting Karen to just sit back and let me expose her. I mean, she wasn't dumb. She knew I was onto something. What I didn't expect, though, was how quickly she'd retaliate. And of course, she didn't waste any time pulling all the strings she had at her disposal. It started with a letter. A ridiculous, over-the-top letter from HOA, of course. This time, they were accusing me of unapproved modifications to the property. They claimed I had violated some obscure section of the neighborhood's rules about architectural consistency. It was laughable, but they were serious. They were trying to hit me with a fine, and they said if I didn't comply, I'd be facing legal action. I mean, come on. This was just a letter, right? Just some empty threat. But then it escalated. I came home one evening, and there was a guy standing on my front lawn. He looked official, holding a clipboard, and just watching my house. I walked over, and before I could even ask what he was doing, he pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. It was a notice from the city about a supposed health and safety inspection that had been scheduled for the next week. They were inspecting everything from the foundation to the plumbing, supposedly to make sure my house was up to code. I wasn't buying it. It was clear what was going on. Karen was behind it, and now she was trying to make my life a living hell. I'd barely even looked at the paper when the guy started asking me if I had any issues with the ramp plans, and I realized she'd probably sent him to harass me. At that point, it was personal. I didn't let him in. I told him I was having none of it, that I had no intention of letting anyone inspect my property without a legitimate reason. He didn't argue much, but I could see the smirk on his face as he left. It wasn't just about trying to scare me, it was about trying to make me feel powerless. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I didn't wait. I called up Mike, who'd been helping me with everything, and told him what had happened. We were already prepared to take legal action, but this was a clear sign that Karen wasn't just going to fold. I needed a counterattack. I wasn't about to sit back while she pulled more stunts like this. Mike told me to gather everything, all the documents, the evidence I'd found, the witness statements. I needed it all, and I needed it ready. He said we had to move fast and make sure we could hit them where it hurt. We started with the press. It was time to go public. Mike had some contacts, and within a few days, I had reporters lined up. We gave them the story, everything from the inflated prices to the backdoor deals, and yes, the illegal payments Karen had been hiding. It wasn't just about the ramp anymore, it was about everything she'd been doing under the radar for years. She had used her position for personal gain, and it was time everyone knew about it. We also got the lawyer to draft a cease and desist letter for the city inspection and the HOA harassment. I wasn't going to let them bully me into submission anymore. This was the turning point. I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. I was making my own. As soon as the story hit the news, the pressure started building on Karen. The phone calls, the emails, it was non-stop. I could tell she was rattled. I'd heard some whispers that she'd started calling in favors, trying to do damage control, but it was too late. The community was starting to see what she really was, and no amount of threats or intimidation was going to stop it. But Karen wasn't done. She wasn't going to just back down. I got another letter from HOA, and this time it was a direct shot at me. They were threatening to take me to court over disrupting the peace of the neighborhood and making false claims against HOA members. It was the kind of thing you'd expect from someone who knew they were losing control and would do anything to keep it. The thing was, it didn't scare me. It only fueled me more. I doubled down. I sent the letter to the media, I posted it online. This was her last attempt to make me look like the bad guy, and I wasn't going to let it stand. I knew I was in the right. I knew the law was on my side, and I was ready to take her down. The counterattack wasn't just about fighting her back, it was about putting the final nail in the coffin. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but I could feel the momentum shifting. Every move she made, every desperate attempt to silence me just made the truth shine brighter. Karen had underestimated me, and now she was going to learn that messing with me was a mistake. It was time. I'd been holding on to everything for weeks, gathering the evidence, talking to the right people, letting the story simmer. But now, it was all coming to a head. I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. It was time to make Karen's little empire fall apart. Mike and I had been working behind the scenes for a while now, getting everything lined up. The evidence was solid, the witnesses were ready, and the media had been eating up every detail we'd been feeding them. But we needed that final push, the kind of exposure that couldn't be ignored. So I reached out to a local news outlet, one that had covered similar stories in the past. I wasn't sure how much they'd bite, but at that point, I had nothing left to lose. When the story hit the airwaves, I swear it felt like the whole neighborhood stopped breathing. Karen's dirty laundry was out there for everyone to see. The inflated prices, the shady business deals with her son-in-law's construction company, the payoffs. And that wasn't all. We had the financial records to prove it, the witness statements, the emails, everything. It was the kind of exposure that couldn't be brushed off with a few excuses or legal threats. The response was immediate. People were shocked. Neighbors who had never spoken a word to me started reaching out, expressing support, saying they had no idea what was really going on behind the scenes. The HOA board? They were suddenly silent. Not a peep. Karen? She went into full damage control mode, but it was already too late. What I didn't expect was how quickly things started unraveling. The media went into overdrive, covering every detail. The more they reported, the more pressure built. Even people outside the neighborhood started chiming in, offering their support, condemning Karen for her actions. The story became bigger than I could have ever imagined. And then, the real fallout started. The city council got involved. I didn't expect them to act as quickly as they did, but they were clearly worried about the bad press. Within days, an investigation was launched into the financial dealings between Karen and her son-in-law's company. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. The more they dug, the more they found. I could practically hear Karen's wheels spinning as her perfect little world began to crumble. I won't lie, there was a part of me that felt vindicated. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every single person Karen had manipulated or taken advantage of over the years. The people she'd bulldozed because they were too scared to speak up. Watching her finally face the consequences, that felt pretty damn good. But it wasn't all sunshine. Karen didn't just fold and walk away. No, she fought back in the only way she knew how. She started spinning lies, turning the tables, making me out to be the bad guy. She tried to turn the media against me, tried to play the victim as if she was some innocent bystander in all of this. It was a typical move from someone who'd never had to face the truth before. But it wasn't working. Her lies only made the evidence stand out more. The more she tried to cover her tracks, the more the public saw her for what she really was, a corrupt, manipulative person who had abused her position for personal gain. And the more people saw it, the more they turned on her. But the real turning point came when the HOA board finally called an emergency meeting. I was ready. I had my lawyer, I had the media on speed dial, and I had all the evidence laid out. I wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. Karen tried to control the narrative one last time, but this time no one was buying it. The board made a decision that night, and it was the nail in the coffin for Karen. They voted to remove her from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. The city froze any pending contracts involving her son-in-law's company, and the investigation into the financial ties between them began to gain serious traction. And just like that, it was over. Karen's reign of manipulation, corruption, and greed had come to an end. The damage was done, but the victory felt sweet. Not just for me, but for everyone she had stepped on to get ahead. As for Emily and me, we finally got that ramp. It wasn't just a victory for our family, it was a win for everyone who had been silenced by Karen's power. And while it felt good to see her exposed for what she was, the real satisfaction came from knowing that we had fought back. We didn't let her win, and that, in the end, was the sweetest part of all. Things settled down pretty quickly after everything hit the fan. It wasn't like some Hollywood movie where I was suddenly a hero or everyone in the neighborhood came rushing to shake my hand. But there was a shift. People started to look at me differently, not in a bad way, just more aware of what had happened. I think a lot of them had been too scared to say anything before. Now they were finally seeing Karen for who she was. As for Emily and me, life kind of found a new normal. The ramp got installed, and she finally had the freedom to move around without relying on me to carry her all the time. It's one of those things that seems small to most people, but it made a world of difference for us. We spent a lot of time outside after that, just enjoying the fresh air, without the constant struggle of trying to get her in and out of the house. It was like a weight had been lifted from both our shoulders. There were still days where the stress of it all lingered. I'd be sitting on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, and then I'd see a news story about HOA or Karen, or sometimes a post from a neighbor who wanted to chat about what happened. I'd get this little jolt in my stomach, like, oh right, that happened. But then I'd just shrug it off. We were living our life now, and that's what mattered. I ran into some of the old neighbors who had avoided me before. They were all a little more friendly now, and some even apologized for not getting involved earlier. I wasn't mad at them anymore. I understood why they stayed quiet. The fear of Karen's influence was real, but seeing the change in their attitudes, I realized that was the whole point of everything, breaking that power dynamic. Maybe now they'd feel a little more comfortable speaking up when something was wrong. As for Karen, I heard she was trying to fight the decision, trying to regain control, but it didn't matter anymore. She had lost, and it wasn't just about the HOA position or the company. It was about the bigger picture. The community knew what she had done, and that was the end of it. I kept my distance. I wasn't interested in going after her anymore. I'd said everything I needed to say, and there was no satisfaction in keeping that fight alive. What I cared about was the fact that we had survived it. Emily was able to live more comfortably, and I wasn't carrying that constant weight of worry on my shoulders anymore. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on the porch with Emily, watching the kids run around the yard, I'll look back on everything that happened. It feels a little surreal now, like some crazy chapter of our life that we've closed. But I'm proud of what we did. We didn't back down. We fought for what was right, and that's not something I'll ever regret. Now, life's just quieter, and I think we've earned that.